The Vancouver Canucks, the roller coaster of an organization that has finally tipped the scale back from riot to parade, as the Canucks made their fans and city proud by advancing to the second round of the playoffs last year amidst a dominant regular season. A division win and a hard-fought 7-game series battle against their rival brethren in Edmonton has the Canucks and their fans thirsting for even greater heights this coming season. With an incredible young core to play off of, what is the limit on expectations for the Vancouver Canucks in 2024-25?
I admit it. Last year was rough.
The Canucks of 2023-24 were a bit of a surprise to a lot of people. I mean, yes, a lot of people expected the Canucks would get better last year, but not win the division good. But that's exactly what happened. The Vancouver Canucks jumped out to a lead in the division thanks to a very strong October and November, as well as the Edmonton Oilers face planning to start last year. They took the lead in the division and basically held on to it for the rest of the season, ultimately taking home their first division championship in over a decade and the first time in the newly revamped Pacific Division. The team was buoyed by a lot of talent, both on the ice and behind the bench. Coach Rick Tocchet won the Jack Adams last year, and Quinn Hughes was named Norris Trophy winner. Their strong play gave them an interesting first-round matchup against the Nashville Predators, which they managed to win in 7 games. Even though the Canucks were the better team, they kind of needed a little bit of help from the Predators in some of those games to overcome some bad starts and some bad injury luck, as Thatcher Demko, their starting goaltender, missed extended parts of the series. In round 2, it was a Western Canada showdown as the Oilers took on the Canucks in a knockdown, drag-em-out brawl that went to 7 games. After going down 3 entering the third, the Canucks pushed to make one final comeback in the playoffs and came up just short. It was a disappointing end to their playoff run, plagued by questions of what could have been if Thatcher Demko was healthy, and if they had just had that one extra weapon to help take them over the Edmonton Oilers. It's the Jack Adams winner himself, Rick Tocchet, returns behind the bench in Vancouver. Not much you can criticize about a guy who was literally just named the best coach in the NHL. The Canucks' success in the regular season was largely due to the discipline and systems that he instilled, which helped him get the most out of his talented roster, and his leadership and competitiveness in the postseason helped the team gut out some very close come-from-behind wins. All of that is a testament to Rick Tocchet, but we still have to ask the question of why the Canucks kept having to come back in games so often last playoffs. Sure, you can attribute a lot of it to not having their starting goaltender, but slow starts seem to plague the Canucks in the playoffs. Tocchet will have to focus on correcting that going into the 24-25 season.
You're a star, you're on top, somebody bring you some hair.
You should kill yourself.
Unquestionably, the Vancouver Canucks' best player was defenseman Quinn Hughes, an absolutely elite offensive defenseman who is still very responsible in his own defensive zone. Now the captain of the Canucks and the team leader, Hughes still has another gear, in my opinion, that he could kick it into as he establishes himself among the best defensemen in the NHL with guys like Cale Makar, Roman Josi, and Adam Fox. Hughes is at that level, and luckily for Canucks fans, he's inked into a deal that will keep him in BC for a long, long time.
Oh, this guy again.
While the Canucks have the star power on the back end, up front they have a lot of very solid weapons as well. The top 6 is a bit remade with guys like Danton Heinen, Jake DeBrusk, and Jonathan Lekkerimäki augmenting the existing core. And that starts with last year's leading point scorer, JT Miller. At age 30, he's reinventing himself as more than just a power forward with a 37-goal, 103-point season. He'll be flanked along with Heinen by deadly sniper Brock Besser, who's coming off of his first 40-goal season of his career. On the second line, though, it's no drop-off in talent. There's a young Elias Pettersson, who just got inked to a massive extension. Even though last year was a bit of a down year, he's still proven to be an 80 or 90-point guy. On the third line, grinder Teddy Bluger will center the very shifty Connor Garland, and the playmaking Nils Hoglander. Just an incredibly well-balanced third line of guys who could play responsible defensively but also make the jump into the offensive zone. And the fourth line kind of continues that theme. There's a lot of skill with guys like Pi Suter and an incredibly underrated journeyman sniper in Daniel Sprong. On the other wing, though, Kiefer Sherwood is much more of the defensively sound physical type, which is, again, like in the third line, a great complement to the other two, giving the Canucks skilled threats down all 4 lines. Defensively, of course, we start and end with Quinn Hughes, but his partner Filip Hronek, while not as offensively talented as Quinn Hughes, Hronek is no slouch in the offensive zone or transition game. But past that high-end talent, things start to get a little bit dicey for the Canucks on the back end. Carson Soucy is just incredibly inconsistent, who's quite strong but not exactly helpful transitioning the puck to offense, paired with the scarecrow known as Tyler Myers, who uses his massive size but basically looks like he's ice skating uphill at all times. The third pairing, Derek Forbort, is a fine depth defenseman with very limited offensive upside, while Vinny Desjardins, his defense partner, is a huge hulking defenseman defensemen with absolutely zero offensive upside. Both are pretty useful as penalty killers, and they're probably your best bet to contain your opponent's more physical players, but I wouldn't rely on either of them to eat major minutes. In net, though, is where the Canucks run into their big problem. Thatcher Demko is still not fully recovered for that knee injury he suffered in Game 1 of the playoffs versus Nashville last year, and even days before the season begins, there's still not a timetable on when he will be set to return. Archer Shieldwell's played very well in his absence in the playoffs last year, and they now have Kevin Lankinen to back him up, but let's be honest here, relying on either of those two guys to carry the load for the entire season for the Canucks is a risky proposition. Demko is one of the elite goaltenders in the NHL, and having him is just going to make the quest for a repeat division title all that much harder. Luckily for the Canucks, Lankinen and Shieldwell are both decent goaltenders, so between the two of them, you could at least cobble together a fairly passable goaltending performance. It's just a question of how long those two can hold down the fort before Demko comes back.
Oh, Britta's in this?
Like I said, there was a lot of turnover in the top 6 as the Vancouver Canucks decided that they wanted to go out and get themselves a bunch of Boston Bruins. Denton Heinen and Jake DeBrusk are now in here, Heinen being the more gritty net front presence scorer, while DeBrusk is a bit more of the smooth skating, wheel and deal shooter. Both will add offensive pop to that top 6 that lost some players from last season, and while I think Heinen is a bit out of place as a top line center, Canucks have enough talent around him. I think they'll be able to kind of shelter him a bit on that line. Like I said, they also filled out the bottom with guys like Sprong and Sherwood. Sprong is one of those guys who's always on a new team every year, but continues to put up like 20 goals like it's nothing, so I'm really glad to see the Canucks took a flyer on him. I think he really helps out their bottom 6. And on the back end, their whole third pairing of Desjardins and Forbort is also remade, another Bruin in there, and luckily they didn't overpay for a couple of guys who don't really have the skill to be anything more than a depth defensive piece.
That's not bad.
Last year, surprisingly, there were actually trade rumors around Elias Pettersson, but luckily the Canucks just decided to do the smart thing and lock him up on a long-term extension, and I think that's a great move. Elias Pettersson is one of the more underrated playmaking forwards in the NHL, coming off of 3 straight 30-goal seasons, and just now entering the prime of his career. There are some injury concerns, I grant, but when he's healthy, Pettersson's among the elite centers in the NHL.
The Gambletron 2000 says the winner is Cincinnati by 200 points. Why, you worthless hunk of junk?
Even without Thatcher Demko, I think the Canucks can make the playoffs easily. They have good enough backup goaltending that I think even with Demko out for an extended period of time, they should be okay. The question's going to be whether they can hold on long enough to make a run at the Pacific Division title. With the Oilers back and hopefully not starting off as horribly as they did last year, the Canucks are going to be hard-pressed to try and win this incredibly competitive division. If they get Demko back soon, they have a shot. If he's out for half the season or more, they're probably fighting with Vegas to get that second seed in the division.
Welcome to Planet Sweden. My beautiful Canucks drafting beautiful Swedes is more assured than them choking when it matters most. Currently terrified last season was a fluke. Praying for an extended while of playoff success as it's been over a decade since the Canucks made the playoffs in back-to-back years. Pray for me.
As a Oilers fan who lives in Vancouver, I've got some words for Canucks fans. Walking home from a watch party in an Oilers jersey, a Canucks fan lowered their window and yelled, "Fuck you to me." What a horrible fan base.
You broke Thatcher Demko, that is all.